Sarah Chen had always been different from other girls in her small Texas town of Cedar Creek. While her classmates played with dolls and dreamed of princess weddings, she spent her afternoons lying in the backyard grass, watching contrails streak across the endless blue sky. Her father, David Chen, an immigrant from Taiwan who owned the local electronics repair shop, would often find her there after school, her math homework forgotten beside her as she tracked the movements of distant aircraft with the intensity of a radar operator. "What do you see up there, little bird?" he would ask, settling down beside her with a grunt. At 45, his knees weren't what they used to be, but he never missed these moments with his daughter. "Freedom," Sarah would answer without hesitation, her 8-year-old eyes never leaving the sky. "I see freedom, Daddy. And, someday, I'm going to fly higher than all of them." David Chen understood dreams. He had arrived in America with nothing but a toolbox and the absolute certainty that hard work could overcome any obstacle. He had built his business from nothing, learned English by watching television late into the night, and earned the respect of a community that had initially viewed him with suspicion. When his daughter talked about flying, he didn't see an impossible fantasy. He saw the same determination that had carried him across an ocean. Sarah's mother, Linda, was less convinced. A practical woman who taught second grade at Cedar Creek Elementary, she worried about filling her daughter's head with unrealistic expectations. "Flying is dangerous, honey," she would say when Sarah brought home library books about aviation history and women pilots. "And it's mostly a man's profession. Maybe you should think about becoming a teacher, like me. Or a nurse. Those are good jobs for women." But Sarah's obsession only grew stronger with age. She devoured every book about aviation she could find, from the Wright brothers to Chuck Yeager. She learned about Amelia Earhart and Jacqueline Cochran, the women who had pushed boundaries and shattered expectations decades before she was born. Most importantly, she discovered the story of the women Air Force service pilots of World War II, the WASP program that had proved women could fly military aircraft just as effectively as men, only to be disbanded and forgotten when the war ended. These stories filled her with both inspiration and frustration. If women could fly military aircraft in 1943, why were there so few female pilots in 1995? Why did everyone act like her dreams were impossible when history proved they weren't? The turning point came during her freshman year of high school. Sarah had maintained straight A's in all her classes, particularly excelling in mathematics and physics, much to her teacher's amazement. Her physics teacher, Mr. Rodriguez, was a former Air Force mechanic who recognized something special in his quiet student. One day after class, he pulled her aside. "Sarah, I've been watching your work this semester," he said, adjusting his glasses. "You have an intuitive understanding of aerodynamics that I rarely see in students. Have you ever considered the Air Force Academy?" The Air Force Academy. Sarah had read about it, of course, but it seemed as distant and unreachable as the moon. "Do they accept girls?" she asked, immediately feeling foolish for the question. "They've been accepting women since 1976, Mr. Rodriguez replied with a smile. "But it's not easy. The academic standards are brutal, the physical requirements are intense, and the competition is fierce. You'd need congressional nomination, perfect grades, leadership experience, and athletic achievement. Most kids who apply don't make it." "But some do," Sarah said quietly. "Yes," he nodded. "Some do. And, from what I've seen, you might just be one of them." That conversation changed everything. Sarah threw herself into preparation with the single-minded focus of someone who had found their true north. She joined the cross-country team, pushing her body to its limits every afternoon after school. She volunteered for every leadership opportunity available, from student government to peer tutoring programs. Her grades, already excellent, became perfect. The physical training was the hardest part. Sarah had never been particularly athletic, preferring books to sports, and the cross-country coach initially questioned whether the slight Asian girl could handle the demands of competitive running. But Sarah possessed something more valuable than natural athletic ability. She had unbreakable mental toughness. Every morning at 5 a.m., she would lace up her running shoes and hit the roads around Cedar Creek, logging mile after mile in the Texas heat. When her lungs burned and her legs screamed for mercy, she would look up at the sky and remember why she was doing this. The pain was temporary. The dream was forever. Her transformation didn't go unnoticed. Classmates who had barely acknowledged her existence began treating her with a mixture of respect and bewilderment. Teachers started using her as an example of dedication and goal setting. Even her mother, initially resistant to Sarah's aviation dreams, began to see that this wasn't a passing phase. "I'm proud of you, sweetheart," Linda said one evening as Sarah sat at the kitchen table, working through calculus problems that wouldn't be taught in her school for another 2 years. She had been teaching herself advanced mathematics using textbooks borrowed from the local community college. "I still worry about you choosing such a difficult path, but I'm proud of your determination." David Chen never worried. Every evening when he came home from the shop, he would find Sarah either running, studying, or researching flight training programs. He would watch her with quiet satisfaction, recognizing in his daughter the same immigrant hunger that had driven him to succeed in a foreign country. "She will fly," he would tell his wife with absolute certainty. "I came to America with nothing and built a business. Sarah was born here, with every advantage I fought to give her. She will fly higher than I ever dreamed." The nomination process was grueling. Sarah had to secure a recommendation from their congressman, which required multiple interviews and a presentation of her achievements. She had to take the SAT and ACT multiple times, scoring in the 99th percentile on both. She needed letters of recommendation from teachers, coaches, and community leaders. Most challenging of all, she had to write essays explaining why she wanted to serve her country as an Air Force officer. The physical fitness test nearly broke her. The academy standards were punishing. She needed to complete a certain number of push-ups, sit-ups, and pull-ups, plus run a mile and a half in under a specified time. 4 months, Sarah trained with the desperation of someone who knew this was her only shot. She worked with the high school football coach after regular practice hours, pushing her body beyond what she had thought possible. The pull-ups were the worst. Sarah could barely complete one when she started training, and she needed to do several to meet the minimum standard. Night after night, she would hang from the bar in her backyard, her father having installed it between 2 sturdy oak trees. Her hands would blister and tear, her arms would shake with exhaustion, but she kept pulling until she could meet the requirement. When the acceptance letter arrived on a cold February morning during her senior year, Sarah was already dressed for her morning run. Her mother found the envelope first, recognizing the Air Force Academy seal, and woke the entire house with her shouts. David Chen cried openly as he read the letter, something Sarah had never seen before in her life. "Congratulations, Cadet Chen," he said through his tears, using her future title for the first time. "You did it. You actually did it." But, as Sarah held the letter in her shaking hands, she realized this was just the beginning. Getting accepted to the Air Force Academy meant earning the chance to prove herself worthy of becoming an officer. It didn't guarantee flight training, and even flight training didn't guarantee fighters. She would be competing against the best and brightest young people in America, many of whom had advantages she could never dream of. The going-away party that Cedar Creek threw for her was both touching and overwhelming. The entire town seemed to turn out, from her elementary school teachers to customers from her father's shop. People she had never spoken to approached her with pride and good wishes. For a girl who had spent most of her life feeling different and isolated, the support was almost too much to handle. "You represent all of us now," said Mrs. Patterson, the librarian who had ordered special aviation books just for Sarah over the years. "When you fly, remember that you're carrying the dreams of everyone who believed in you." Standing in the backyard where she had first dreamed of flying, surrounded by the people who had watched her grow from a sky-gazing child into a young woman ready to chase her impossible dreams, Sarah felt the weight of expectation and opportunity settling on her shoulders. Tomorrow, she would board a plane for Colorado Springs and begin the most challenging 4 years of her life. But tonight, she looked up at the stars appearing in the darkening Texas sky and made a promise to herself and to everyone who had supported her journey. She wouldn't just graduate from the academy. She wouldn't just become a pilot. She was going to earn her place in the cockpit of the most advanced fighter aircraft ever built, and she was going to prove that dreams don't recognize gender, race, or background.
Dreams only recognize determination and the willingness to pay whatever price success demands.
As the party wound down and her neighbors headed home, Sarah remained in the backyard with her parents, watching the night sky. A military transport plane passed overhead, its navigation lights blinking steadily as it headed west toward California or perhaps overseas. In 18 hours, she would be on a similar aircraft, beginning a journey that would either fulfill her lifelong dream or teach her that some mountains are too high to climb. Scared, her father asked, following her gaze upward.
Terrified, Sarah admitted.
But not of failing. I'm scared of not being enough, of not pushing hard enough when it gets difficult.
David Chen smiled in the darkness.
Fear means you understand how much this matters.
Use it. Let it make you stronger. That night, Sarah barely slept.
She lay in her childhood bed, staring at the ceiling where she had hung dozens of model airplanes over the years, and thought about the path that had led her here. From a small girl lying in the grass to a young woman about to join one of the most elite institutions in America. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, she would begin the transformation from Sarah Chen, small-town dreamer, to Lieutenant Chen, United States Air Force officer and pilot. The last thing she remembered before finally falling asleep was the sound of a jet passing overhead in the distance, its engines fading into the Texas night. Soon, she promised herself, she would be the one in the cockpit, pushing through the darkness toward dawn.
The bus ride from Colorado Springs Airport to the Air Force Academy felt like traveling to another planet.
Sarah pressed her face against the window as they approached the campus, watching the dramatic mountain backdrop unfold before her. The Rampart Range stretched into the sky like a granite wall, making everything else seem small and temporary by comparison. When the distinctive chapel spires came into view, sharp and angular against the Colorado sky, she felt her stomach tighten with nervous excitement.
In processing was controlled chaos.
Hundreds of new cadets, all trying to look confident while feeling completely overwhelmed, moved through stations where they received uniforms, room assignments, and their first taste of military life. Sarah found herself standing in line between a linebacker from Alabama who looked like he could bench press a car, and a chess champion from Massachusetts who appeared to be mentally calculating the mathematical probability of their survival. "Chen, Sarah M.," she announced when she reached the registration desk, her voice steadier than she felt. The upperclassman behind the table, a junior with steely eyes and perfect posture, looked her up and down with unconcealed skepticism.
"Let me guess. You want to fly fighters?"
"Yes, sir," Sarah replied, meeting his gaze directly.
He snorted. "They all do.
We'll see if you're still here at Christmas, much less graduation."
Her first roommate was Jessica Martinez from Phoenix, a vivacious girl whose father was a retired Air Force colonel.
Jessica had grown up on military bases around the world and moved through the academy environment with the confidence of someone who understood the culture instinctively. Sarah envied that ease, but she was grateful for Jessica's willingness to explain the unwritten rules that seemed to govern every aspect of cadet life. "The key is never showing weakness," Jessica explained on their second night, as they polished their shoes to the mirror finish required for morning inspection.
"Everyone here is smart. Everyone here was the best at their high school.
But not everyone can handle the pressure when it gets really intense." The pressure started immediately. Academic classes were demanding enough: calculus, physics, chemistry, engineering, and history all compressed into an accelerated schedule that left little time for anything beyond studying and sleeping. But the real challenge was the military training that permeated every moment of their lives. Sarah struggled initially with the aggressive, confrontational style that some upperclassmen used to test new cadets. She had been raised to be respectful and polite, to avoid conflict and work through problems with quiet persistence. But military training demanded instant responses to barked orders, the ability to function under stress, and a level of assertiveness that felt foreign to her nature.
"Cadet Chen."
Cadet Captain Morrison, a senior from Texas with a voice like a foghorn, would bellow during morning formations.
"What's the airspeed of an unladen swallow?"
"Sir,
what do you mean, an African or European swallow?"
Sarah learned to respond, having memorized the required Monty Python reference that was part of Academy tradition.
But Morrison wasn't interested in humor. "Drop and give me 20, Chen." And, next time, speak up like you mean it.
The push-ups were never really about physical fitness, though Sarah's arms burned as she counted them out on the concrete parade ground. They were about mental toughness, about learning to maintain composure while being publicly corrected, about understanding that military life demanded perfection in small details because lives depended on getting big things exactly right. Flight training during her junior year brought new challenges and new doubts. Sarah had dreamed of flying for so long that she had convinced herself it would feel natural, instinctive. Instead, she discovered that piloting an aircraft was one of the most demanding mental and physical activities she had ever attempted. The T-6 Texan trainer felt alive beneath her hands, responding to every tiny input with movements that could quickly cascade into dangerous situations if not immediately corrected. Her first instructor pilot, Major Patricia Williams, was a former F-16 pilot who had transitioned to training after an injury ended her fighter career. Major Williams was everything Sarah hoped to become: confident, skilled, and absolutely uncompromising in her standards. Flying isn't about being good enough, Major Williams told her after a particularly challenging lesson where Sarah had struggled to maintain altitude during complex maneuvers. It's about being so good that you can handle anything the sky throws at you and still bring your aircraft and your wingman home safely. Good enough gets people killed. Sarah threw herself into flight training with the same obsessive dedication she had applied to academy preparation. She spent hours in flight simulators, practicing emergency procedures until her responses became automatic.
She studied aircraft systems manuals until she could diagram every component from memory.
She worked with upperclassmen who had already earned their pilot wings, absorbing their hard-won knowledge about air-to-air combat tactics and weapons systems.
But knowledge and dedication couldn't overcome every obstacle.
During her first solo cross-country flight, Sarah encountered severe turbulence that pushed her Texan trainer beyond anything she had experienced in training. As the aircraft bucked and rolled in the violent air, her carefully practiced procedures seemed to evaporate from her memory. For terrifying minutes, she fought to maintain control while wind shears tried to tear the wings from her aircraft. When she finally landed at the designated auxiliary field, her hands were shaking so badly she could barely complete the shutdown checklist. The flight instructor who met her on the ground took one look at her pale, sweat-soaked face and knew exactly what she had experienced.
"Rough ride?" he asked gently. Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice.
"Good. Now you know what it feels like when Mother Nature tries to kill you.
The question is, do you want to get back up there tomorrow?" Sarah looked at the T-6 sitting on the ramp, its propeller still ticking as the engine cooled.
Yesterday, this aircraft had felt like a partner, an extension of her will. Today, it seemed like a barely contained collection of forces that wanted to destroy her. But, as she stood there in the Colorado wind, she realized that her fear wasn't of flying. Her fear was of not being good enough to master something she loved more than anything else in the world.
"Yes, sir," she said. "I want to get back up there."
The instructor smiled. "Then, you're going to make a fine pilot, Cadet Chen."
Academic performance at the academy required a different kind of excellence.
Sarah discovered that being smart wasn't enough when everyone around her was equally intelligent. Success demanded time management skills that pushed the boundaries of human endurance, the ability to absorb vast amounts of information quickly, and the mental flexibility to switch between subjects as different as thermodynamics and military history without missing a beat. Her lowest point came during her sophomore year, in a particularly brutal semester that combined advanced calculus with aeronautical engineering and military strategy coursework. Sarah had always prided herself on her mathematical abilities, but the pace and complexity of academy coursework was unlike anything she had encountered. For the first time in her life, she found herself struggling to maintain the grade point average required to remain in flight training. Late one February night, as snow fell outside her dormitory window and her roommate slept, Sarah sat at her desk staring at a thermodynamics problem that seemed to mock her attempts to solve it. She had been working on it for 3 hours, filling page after page with calculations that led nowhere. Around her, the walls of her room were covered with diagrams of aircraft systems, photos of famous pilots, and a small Texas flag that reminded her of home. The doubt that crept into her mind that night was more dangerous than any weather she had faced in the cockpit. Maybe her mother had been right. Maybe teaching or nursing would have been safer choices. Maybe she was fooling herself to think that a girl from a small Texas town could compete with cadets who had grown up in military families, attended elite preparatory schools, and possessed advantages she could barely imagine. Her phone rang at 2:30 a.m., startling her from her spiral of self-doubt.
"Sarah?"
Her father's voice was thick with sleep and concern.
"I've been awake thinking about you. How are you doing, little bird?" Sarah almost broke down completely. "I don't know if I can do this, Daddy. Everyone else seems so much better prepared than me. I feel like I'm always one step behind."
David Chen was quiet for a long moment.
"Do you remember what I told you when you started running cross-country? About the difference between people who want something and people who need something?"
Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand.
"People who want something will work until it gets hard. People who need something will work until they get it. Which one are you?"
Sarah looked around her room, at the evidence of her lifelong obsession with aviation, at the acceptance letter from the academy that she had framed and hung where she could see it every morning. She thought about the 8-year-old girl who had lain in the grass watching contrails, and the 18-year-old who had pushed her body beyond its limits to earn her place here. "I need this," she said quietly.
"Then, you'll find a way. You always have."
After hanging up, Sarah returned to her thermodynamics problem with fresh perspective. Instead of trying to force a solution through brute intellectual effort, she broke the problem into smaller components, approaching each piece methodically. At 4:15 a.m., she finally arrived at the correct answer, not through brilliance but through persistence.
Leadership opportunities at the academy taught Sarah lessons that no textbook could provide.
During her senior year, she was selected as a squadron commander, responsible for the training and welfare of 40 underclassmen. The position required her to balance competing demands, maintaining the high standards expected of academy cadets while supporting struggling classmates who reminded her of her own difficult moments. One of her most challenging cases was Cadet Thompson, a brilliant computer science major from California who excelled academically but struggled with the physical demands of military training. Thompson was exactly the kind of person Sarah might have been if she hadn't spent years preparing her body for academy life, and watching him struggle brought back memories of her own early difficulties. "I'm thinking about quitting," Thompson confided to her after failing his third consecutive physical fitness test.
"Maybe I'm just not cut out for military life."
Sarah looked at the young man who reminded her so much of herself at 18, smart, determined, but overwhelmed by the gap between his dreams and his current capabilities.
"What made you want to come here?" she asked.
"I wanted to work on military satellite systems, to help protect our country using technology."
"And, has that changed?" Thompson shook his head. "No, but maybe I can do that as a civilian."
Sarah spent the next hour talking Thompson through a training plan that would help him meet fitness standards, but, more importantly, she helped him remember why he had chosen the academy path in the first place. 3 months later, when he passed his fitness test for the first time, the pride in his eyes reminded her why leadership meant helping others achieve their potential rather than simply demonstrating her own capabilities. Graduation day arrived with the sudden shock of an ending that had seemed impossibly distant just 4 years earlier. As Sarah stood with her classmates in the perfectly aligned formation that represented 4 years of training and discipline, she felt the weight of transformation. The uncertain 18-year-old from Texas was gone, replaced by Second Lieutenant Sarah Chen, United States Air Force, with pilot wings on her uniform and assignment orders to specialized undergraduate pilot training. Her parents had driven from Texas for the ceremony, and her father's face showed the same pride she had seen when her academy acceptance letter arrived. But there was something else in his expression now, recognition that his daughter had become someone capable of handling responsibilities that would have been unimaginable to the girl who used to lie in their backyard watching airplanes. "What's next?" her mother asked as they walked across the academy grounds after the ceremony. "Flight training," Sarah replied, fingering the silver wings pinned to her uniform. "Real flight training, where I learn to fly the aircraft I'll use as an operational pilot."
"And then?"
Sarah looked up at the Colorado sky, where a formation of F-16s from the nearby operational squadron was performing a flyover for the graduating class.
"Then, I find out if I'm good enough to fly fighters."
But, even as she said the words, Sarah knew that good enough wasn't the right phrase anymore. For years at the academy had taught her that excellence wasn't about meeting minimum standards. It was about pushing beyond what seemed possible, about finding strength in moments when strength seemed impossible, and about earning the right to pursue dreams that others might consider unrealistic. As her family drove away from the academy that evening, Sarah took one last look at the mountain backdrop that had been her view for 4 years. Tomorrow, she would report to flight training, where she would compete against the best young pilots in the Air Force for the limited number of fighter assignments available.
The academy had been preparation. Now the real test would begin.
Specialized undergraduate pilot training at Laughlin Air Force Base in Texas felt like coming home and entering a foreign country simultaneously. The flat landscape and endless sky reminded Sarah of her childhood in Cedar Creek, but everything else about her new environment was designed to push pilots beyond their comfort zones and into the rarefied atmosphere where only the most skilled aviators could survive. SUPT was where dreams came to die or be reborn as reality. Of the 35 students in Sarah's class, only the top graduates would receive fighter assignments. The rest would fly cargo planes, tankers, or bombers' honorable missions, but not the air-to-air combat role that Sarah had dreamed about since childhood. The competition was fierce and largely hidden beneath the collaborative surface that training demanded. Her first instructor pilot, Captain Rick Martinez, was a former F-15 Eagle pilot whose easy smile concealed the kind of precision that had kept him alive through 2 combat deployments. During their initial meeting, he reviewed Sarah's academy records with the thoroughness of a detective examining evidence. Strong academics, excellent leadership ratings, solid flight training scores, he murmured, flipping through her file.
But SUPT is different from anything you've experienced. We're not just teaching you to fly.
We're teaching you to think in 3 dimensions while your aircraft travels at speeds that give you seconds to make decisions that determine whether you live or die. The training aircraft was a T-38 Talon, a supersonic jet trainer that looked like a sleek white arrow and flew like a barely controlled rocket.
Sarah's first flight in the T-38 was a revelation that bordered on religious experience.
The Academy's T-6 trainers had been powerful, but the T-38 was her introduction to the world of high-performance military aviation where physics and human limitations collided in spectacular fashion. "Take us up to 20,000 feet, Captain Martinez instructed through the intercom as Sarah settled into the front seat of the tandem cockpit. "And, remember, this aircraft wants to go fast.
Your job is to think faster." The acceleration was intoxicating.
Sarah pushed the throttles forward and felt 15,000 pounds of thrust push her back into her ejection seat as the T-38 clawed its way skyward at a rate that made her previous flying experience seem like a leisurely Sunday drive. The ground fell away beneath them with startling speed, and, within minutes they were flying through thin air where the sky faded from blue to purple and the curve of the earth became visible on the horizon. "Now let's see what you're made of," Captain Martinez said. "Roll inverted and pull through to a heading of 090. Sarah's training took over, but execution in the T-38 required precision she had never needed before. As she rolled the aircraft upside down and pulled the nose through the horizon, the G-forces pressed her down into her seat with crushing intensity. Her vision began to gray around the edges as blood drained from her brain, but she maintained pressure on the stick and kept the aircraft tracking toward the assigned heading. "Good," Captain Martinez commented when she rolled out on course.
"But you're fighting the aircraft. The T-38 is like a thoroughbred racehorse. You don't muscle it around the sky. You guide it."
Every training flight brought new challenges and new humiliations. Formation flying required Sarah to position her aircraft within feet of another T-38 while both planes traveled at 400 miles per hour. The first time she attempted to join up on her instructor's wing, she found herself oscillating wildly, overcorrecting every small deviation until Captain Martinez was forced to take control of the aircraft before she caused a collision. "Relax," he coached as they reset for another attempt.
Small inputs. Think of it like threading a needle while riding a motorcycle. Smooth and steady wins every time. Navigation training pushed her mental capacity to its limits.
Flying a precise course at high altitude required constant calculations of wind drift, fuel consumption, and timing while simultaneously monitoring multiple radio frequencies and maintaining visual scanning for other aircraft. Sarah learned to compartmentalize her thinking, handling routine flight tasks automatically while devoting her active attention to navigation problems and communication requirements. But the real test of her potential came during air-to-air training, where students learned the basics of fighter tactics against simulated adversaries. Sarah's first engagement was a disaster of spatial disorientation and tactical confusion. Within minutes of the initial merge, she had lost sight of her opponent, failed to maintain proper energy management, and found herself defenseless in a position where a real enemy would have destroyed her aircraft. Knock it off, Captain Martinez called over the radio, ending the engagement.
Chen, what just happened up there?
Sarah's voice was tight with frustration as she responded. I lost sight of the bandit after the merge and got defensive instead of maintaining offensive capabilities.
And
I forgot to manage my energy state, so when I tried to re-engage, I was too slow and too low to be effective.
Captain Martinez's voice softened slightly. Everyone struggles with air-to-air initially. It's three-dimensional chess played at 500 miles per hour while pulling 4 Gs. The ones who master it aren't necessarily the smartest or the most naturally gifted. They're the ones who can learn from their mistakes fast enough to stay alive.
That evening, Sarah stayed late in the squadron building, studying air-to-air tactics manuals and watching gun camera footage from training engagements. She analyzed her mistakes with the obsessive attention to detail that had carried her through the academy, but air combat was different from academic problems. There were no formula sheets or reference materials in the cockpit. Success required instant recognition of three-dimensional relationships and the ability to predict her opponent's moves while executing her own tactical plan. Her breakthrough came during her 15th air-to-air training flight. Instead of trying to force solutions through aggressive maneuvering, Sarah began to think several moves ahead, setting up her opponent by appearing vulnerable while actually maintaining positional advantage. When the merge came, she stayed calm and patient, waiting for her opponent to make a mistake rather than creating opportunities for her own errors. Guns kill on bandit, she called over the radio as her aircraft's targeting system locked onto the opposing T-38. For the first time, she had successfully completed an air-to-air engagement from initial contact to simulated weapons employment.
Outstanding work, Chen, Captain Martinez responded. That's what tactical thinking looks like. The academic portion of SUPT was equally demanding. Aerodynamics, aircraft systems, emergency procedures, and weapons employment filled every hour not spent in the cockpit.
Sarah found herself studying late into the night, memorizing performance charts and emergency checklists that could mean the difference between life and death in actual flight operations.
Her roommate, Lieutenant Ashley Parker from Colorado, was pursuing transport aircraft and couldn't understand Sarah's obsession with fighter training.
Why put yourself through this?
Ashley asked one evening as Sarah practiced chair flying through complex tactical scenarios.
Transport pilots have better quality of life, more predictable schedules, and, honestly, less chance of getting shot down. Sarah paused in her mental rehearsal of defensive maneuvers.
Because this is what I've wanted since I was 8 years old.
And because someone has to be willing to put their life on the line to protect the freedom that lets you choose to fly transports.
Ashley shook her head.
You're crazy, but I respect the commitment.
The pressure intensified as the class approached the halfway point where initial aircraft assignments would be announced.
Sarah was ranked third in her class academically and second in flight performance, but she knew that rankings could shift dramatically based on a single poor performance or exceptional achievement. The instructors evaluated not just technical skills but judgment, leadership, and the indefinable quality they called fighter pilot potential.
Major Patricia Williams, Sarah's former academy instructor who had transferred to SUPT, became an unofficial mentor during the most challenging phase of training.
You have the skills, she told Sarah during a counseling session.
But fighter pilots need more than technical proficiency.
They need the confidence to make split-second decisions in combat, knowing that hesitation gets people killed.
How do you develop that kind of confidence? Sarah asked.
By being so thoroughly prepared that your responses become automatic, and by trusting your training when everything around you turns chaotic, Major Williams replied.
And by understanding that fear is normal. Courage isn't the absence of fear.
It's functioning effectively despite being scared. The defining moment came during Sarah's check ride with the squadron commander, Colonel James Hartford, a combat veteran with over 2,000 hours in F-16s. Check rides were make-or-break evaluations that determined whether students continued training or were eliminated from the program. Colonel Hartford's reputation for uncompromising standards meant that passing his evaluation was a significant achievement in itself. Today we're going to see if you can handle emergency situations while maintaining tactical awareness, Colonel Hartford briefed before their flight. I'm going to simulate multiple system failures, and I want you to continue with air-to-air training while managing the emergencies.
In combat, the enemy doesn't stop shooting just because your aircraft is broken.
The flight was a masterclass in applied pressure. Colonel Hartford simulated an engine fire during a complex tactical maneuver, forcing Sarah to execute emergency procedures while maintaining formation with simulated friendly aircraft. He failed her primary flight control system during an air-to-air engagement, requiring her to continue the fight with degraded aircraft performance. Each emergency demanded immediate recognition, proper procedures, and the mental discipline to continue with her mission despite aircraft malfunctions. Sarah's academy training and her years of mental preparation served her well. She methodically worked through each emergency checklist while maintaining situational awareness and continuing to execute tactical maneuvers. When Colonel Hartford simulated a hydraulic failure that affected her landing gear, she calmly declared in the roar of twin engines cut through the morning silence as Captain Sarah Chen pushed the throttles forward on the most advanced fighter jet ever built. Below her, dozens of male pilots stood on the tarmac, their arms crossed, waiting for her to fail. They had made their opinions clear in the briefing room just hours before. Women didn't belong in the cockpit of an F-22 Raptor, especially not performing the kind of high-stress maneuvers that separated the elite from the ordinary. But, as Sarah pulled back on the stick and felt 15 tons of pure American engineering respond to her touch, climbing toward 30,000 feet at a rate that would make a rocket jealous, she smiled behind her oxygen mask.
They wanted to see what she could do?
She was about to show them exactly why she had earned her wings the hard way, and why their assumptions about her capabilities were about to be shattered in the most spectacular way possible. What happened next would become legend in the fighter pilot community, a story whispered in ready rooms and shared at airshows for years to come. Because sometimes, the best response to doubt isn't words, it's a perfect barrel roll at Mach 1.5 that leaves everyone on the ground questioning everything they thought they knew about who belongs in the sky.